Hello everybody, Andrew Casey at Hypersanitybooks. Today we're taking a look at Stephen King's It. Comparing book to film, there will be certain footage within this video that's not for minors, so if you are under a certain age, do click out. There is also a point that's more disturbing at the end of the video as a final thought, because there is something within the book that isn't within the films that should not have been. And it makes me have a negative opinion towards the book. I will keep certain things simple between reviewing between book and film, and finalise with my final points at the end. Number 1. September 1986. This is when the book first got published, and yes, it did take some time to write. Also, Stephen King found this was one of the hardest books to write, because it was about the subject of fear, and personal fears are prevalent within the book, especially the rumour of him having arachnophobia. So I don't know how confirmed that is. I've tried to find a detailed answer. I've only heard other opinions about that. The story is based between 1958 and 1985. That's the premise of the book, between the story going between when the main characters are children to when they're adults. It's also interesting because it's a story that has at certain points 7 protagonists, so it shows how Pennywise has the power over each child within the trauma of their childhood, also within their adult life. There are a lot of scenes that go between characters that make it engaging, but also show how threatening Pennywise actually is.
That you see a photograph and I come alive. Such a great idea, because then it becomes a pleasure to deliver.
I'll drive you crazy and I'll kill you all.
I'm every nightmare you've ever had.
Number 2. John Wayne Gacy. Yes, Pennywise is based off a real-life serial killer. Now, I will say, I don't condone the acts of violence, murder, especially towards children, so we will move on. Number 3. The Notebook. Stephen King used a notebook to keep track of all of the characters. This is one of the best bits of writing advice for a lot of authors, especially when you're doing a story between multiple protagonists. Having a diary allowed him to go for checking over notes to keep track of character names, character locations, and other smaller subplots. It also helps for the bigger story coming forward. And having a notebook when writing any type of story is a good suggestion. I still use it myself. I have a notebook with every book I'm working on, and it's just a way of keeping track of names. Especially when you change a character's name through the story, it is handy to have a notebook. Number 4. What is your worst fear?
Take your pick. Bird. Billy boy. Except for the one on the end.
My worst fear used to be Pennywise. I was traumatized as a child with certain parts of the original film. After a long time, even in my early 30s. And when I say worst fear, I mean the thing that scares you the most, to the point that you can't look at it. Now, moving forward, I've worked from there. And since going through certain changes in life, I actually watched the movie and quite enjoyed it. It's one of my all-time favourite movies, is the original Stephen King's It. Also, knowing that Tim Curry plays the part does take some of that pressure off. With the interactions that Tim Curry had on set with the other children, he had a good time being fun with them while on set. So it did take away a lot of the pressures of filmmaking. When working on a story, that is one question to always ask yourself. What is the worst? Or when you're writing something, what is the polar opposite to Pennywise? Or what is something else as the most powerfulest creature within this particular story? And sometimes when you think, it allows you to work on stories ahead, or it gives you more than a blank page to work with. And sometimes some ideas you could work on and come back to later, just like Stephen King did with Under the Dome. He had ideas for that story and came back to it 20 years later, and it's a massive hit. So that's one of the things that I liked with the premise of the story. Now, Stephen King's It himself would be my worst fear. With other characters, it touched into reasons why that was their worst fear. And that was something that I did enjoy with the book, but I enjoyed it more with the original movie, and with the remake, I still like the remake. I just have a closer heart with the original. Number 5, Implied Violence. I enjoyed the movie because it's implied, and we'll just focus on the Georgie scene. Within the first movie, it is implied that Pennywise gets him. You see him grab his hand, and you see the teeth sink forward, and that ends it. But it's implied that he got him. With the next movie, tears his arm off. It's a lot more graphic. It's gruesome. I actually enjoyed the movie quite a lot. Though, yes, I don't condone seeing children die within stories. Though within this one, it showed the realistic side that he is an absolute threat. Or it is a real threat. Within the book, it is even more graphic and more violent towards the child's death. And I felt like the book went over the top with explaining the violence and the details of the gore. So yes, I come back to another argument. Sometimes when writing a story, it is always good to go for some implied violence in most situations, because sometimes too much violence and gore does put the rating up towards an R rating, and then less people can enjoy the story. And I think the reality of what they did with the first movie, I will always have that as a higher appreciation for the film, implying it. Number 6, Interdimensional Powers.
Excuse me, sir. Do you have Prince Albert in a can? You do? Well, you better let the poor guy out.
With the first movie, it does show that he has a lot of power and other people seem blasé to what's going on. There is also a certain premise when you leave the town, you might be no longer under his power, or you forget about the history. So that was interesting within the story. With the remake, very similar. I didn't mind how they told the story that way. Now, as a more disturbing part within the book, I find the interdimensional powers are too ridiculous, which makes Pennywise overpowered. And that's one of the reasons why I guess there is a lack of, understanding as a child when I was younger to being absolutely terrified of Pennywise, having wake up many times, feeling like I'm in a dream in the palm of his hand. And there's nothing I can do about it, almost like a god. And I think godlike powers within a story like this just doesn't work for me. Though, for Stephen King within his universe of writing, it has connections to The Dark Tower and other stories that he's done. I've also heard rumours of other points that have said that Pennywise is still alive after certain events. I'm not sure, because I don't know the reference point to go off to confirm whether Pennywise is still alive or not. Number 7, Bill Denborough. I enjoyed his character, especially in the first movie, and I know I keep saying that, though it was my favourite movie. I do have a lot of scenes that I liked within It Chapter 1 and 2 as well, though, with the character within the book as well, he feels like the central protagonist. And even though the characters are written not necessarily to be deuteragonist or to be tritagonist, they have the certain range between characters to all be protagonist, overcoming their worst fears and the ultimate fear of Pennywise. And I think he suffered the most by the death of his brother Georgie. And it was realistic with the stutter how it worked to being afraid and unable to cope. So I feel he was the central protagonist of the story.
You're Ben. Yeah, and you're Bill. Yeah, and this is Eddie.
Number 8, The Ritual of Chud. The Ritual of Chud was not in the original movie, and within It Chapter 2, it was pretty close with It Chapter 2 to what happened within the book. Though, there was another point of a character that was not within the movie, which was in the book. And I think it's Myrtle, or something, as a big giant turtle. I'll pull up the word on the screen. So yes, there is a big, magical, interdimensional turtle that is the polar opposite to Pennywise and helps the Losers Club to beat him. So even though there was the history of how the ritual of Chew didn't work previously and Pennywise transformed and killed all the other people from the past, which made it seem helpless, the turtle has its interdimensional moment to help the Losers Club to work into beating Pennywise and overcome their fears once and for all. And once they're no longer afraid, there is nothing to fear, and Pennywise loses that power. The true form is also said to be the lights, and here in Australia we have a story about the Nim Nim lights, which I'll play a little bit of a video about that now, because it is something as a mystery within Australia to what the Nim Nim lights actually are and what it means. And then I'll get to the next two disturbing points.
The Min Min lights. Thousands of eyewitnesses have come forward with similar and terrifying accounts of these ghostly lights that follow you.
Number 9. The worst parents. Now, the two worst parents within the film is the mother to the poor boy, making him feel like he has a lot of sicknesses and illnesses. She creates unnecessary fear for his life and fear of just about everything within his surroundings. And yes, after the times of COVID, it does make us question a lot of things about diseases and illnesses and different sicknesses. Well, from there, the worst parent is Beverly's father.
Tell me you're still my little girl.
The stuff within the first movie and the remake is horrible. He was a horrible person, and there are consequences to the damage that he did to his daughter. And from the story within the book, it's a lot more graphic what he does to abuse his daughter, and I mean physically and sexually as well, which leads towards a lot more trauma for this character, and it brings on to the final point that is more disturbing, that makes me not recommend this book to people, because of, for one, it's a lengthy book, and there's a deeper point to the trauma that is created to her because of the father. And I think it's interesting in the story, but I want to go back to Implied Violence. Number 10. Final thoughts. I have to say, with the original film, I enjoy it the most. And yes, it was part of my childhood trauma, where I was absolutely afraid of Pennywise. And it did take a lot of years, approximately 27 years, just like within the book and the movie, from childhood to a more mature age adult. And I do appreciate having that history, and I appreciate overcoming that fear to enjoy the film quite a lot. I also do enjoy the remake. I feel it's somewhat realistic, even though it has its supernatural elements and themes. I do like the ending of It Chapter 2 as well. Final thoughts on the book? I do not recommend it to anyone, and in my own personal opinion, I think it should be banned, as it is within a lot of schools. Kerry is banned, though I think there should be some leeway within high schools and universities, of course. But with the Pennywise book, yes, the worst scene is the child abuse from the father to Beverly. After they beat Pennywise the first time and realise there's a chance he will come back, they make a blood pact. The blood pact is not with the handshake with broken glass as you think. The blood pact is by having intercourse as 12-year-old minors with all 6 guys.
What the hell is that?
Now, writing about that type of story is terrible. It is also graphic how it is written, and I go back to the previous argument of implied violence. And even though it's on a subject matter that I don't approve of, it could have been written a lot differently to confirm certain psychology and abuse or whatever to why the character is the way she is. And I feel it was completely unnecessary to take that approach because the characters are 12 years old within the book. Therefore, I don't recommend the book to anyone. Otherwise, that's it for today. Hit like, subscribe, comment. I will be touching on some difficult subject matters like I did in the other case study video I did on public enemies, though that is another story that shall be told another time, with certain censorships, of course.